Welcome to another episode of the PT Student Center, everybody. My name is Sarah Falbo, and today I have Frank Benedetto on the podcast. Welcome.
Hey, Sarah, thanks for having me.
Of course. I'm pumped to chat with you and hear more about your backstory and kind of dive back into PT school. So, the first question I ask everybody is what got you into PT in the first place?
Ooh, I love that question. So I broke my femur when I was
Mm.
16 years old. Had a displaced fracture of my femur distal. Pretty brutal injury, to be honest with you. My foot was like rotated 180 degrees. So when they
How?
carried me off the football field,
Uh,
my foot there's like a VHS tape, and I'm like dating myself here. There's a VHS tape of me getting carried off, and my foot is literally like maybe 160, pointing in the wrong direction. And my experience with that wasn't actually very good. So I healed really quickly from that, made the recovery. And then in my second baseball game back after like a 6-month recovery of my broken leg, I tore my meniscus, which I don't believe I tore at all in that moment. It was probably missed from the original injury, and then had to go through another surgery and then never returned to sports. So it was my junior year of football that I broke it. And then I never returned to sports. And I had a lot of regrets around that. But that experience is what led me to want to become a doctor of physical therapy.
so, did you have physical therapy post injury?
I did. Yes.
And what was your experience with it?
I think that my experience was love them as people, still love them as people. Yet in retrospect, there was more that could have been done towards the tail end or more related to my sports.
Mm,
But interestingly enough, too, and I still actually can't piece this together. So a lot of times when you interview somebody who's a little bit further along than you, at least the perception of that, the person further along has masterfully put together, like, this is how it all happened. And there's this
exactly.
timeline. It's all constructed. Half the stuff is random, half the stuff is strategy. The one thing I don't actually know why I stumbled upon this, but in my application letter to Kane University, which is where I went for my undergrad degree, I said that I was applying to the field of psychology for my undergrad because I sensed that there's something missing from the field of physical therapy where we were not incorporating enough what I termed at that age positive psychology into rehab. And I think even though I had a great experience, there was still something in me as a 16, 17-year-old kid that was like, there's something really missing from this process as a whole. And that really, inspired the trajectory of my career.
So you were a junior in high school when you stopped your sports?
Yes.
Oh man. Okay. And then so from that point on, you're like, I'm gonna go into undergrad, go for psychology. Did you think you were gonna continue after that?
Yes. I had entered knowing that I was going to do an undergrad in psych with a doctorate in physical therapy. My goal
Okay.
was to combine the two of in some capacity, the skill sets.
Okay. And did you ever use the psychology bachelor?
Daily,
I
daily.
mean, in terms of like between undergrad and grad school.
Oh, no, 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 no. I did a
Okay, okay.
3 year program. So I did 3 years of undergrad and then 3 years of grad school.
Ah, see, there we
Yeah.
go. I love those. That's pretty cool. Okay.
Yeah.
So, how was your transition? I know it's a little different because it was a 3+3 program, but how was your transition from undergrad, quote unquote, into grad school?
Well, there's another surgery that took place in this exact time frame that shaped the way that graduate school started. So I had, I'm going to use the terms from back when I was there. I was driving and I hit a bump and my shoulder to like dip and be like, oh, what is this? Like it would sublux, I'd feel like it popping, right? So I would go to the doctor and I was like, yeah, it feels like my shoulder's popping or something. And they're like, oh, you have a labrum tear. You definitely need that operated on. And uh I'll show you. This is my non-operative arm. So here's my try not to thoracic. I don't want to I don't want to
Beautiful.
compensate too much here, but okay,
Beautiful
so
range of
here's that.
motion.
Now that's good. I was right. You approve?
Yeah, that was great.
Here's this side.
Oh, okay. So, for
That's
those
all
of
I
you
got
listening,
external, and this is all I got internal. For anybody just listening, my right side has basically 30 or 40 degrees of external rotation. And maybe about 10 to 15 degrees of internal rotation. So that surgery and the shitty physical therapy that occurred right after it removed basically the function of my right shoulder for anything overhead. And that's when I started to take a little bit of a turn towards this profession that I fell in love with from my broken leg rehab. Was like this kind of incredible, full leg cast, tiny little leg, these pins sticking out of it, external fixators, pulled them out, and then like I'm back running. I mean, this is amazing. And then the meniscus tear. I was like, oh wait, what could they? Nah, I'm sure it was fine. Yeah. And then when this happened, and then just a year or two later now in PT school, I learned what should have been done, the prehab or the rehab that could have been done, that likely if I had just gotten strong, I would not have needed my surgery, because I'm not an overhead athlete. I wasn't playing baseball or swimming at some super competitive level. All I needed was to get stronger in my shoulder at that juncture. And no one in my world, as far as the medical providers, did that. So I entered PT school pretty skeptical now. So now I'm like, I love this profession. I hate this profession. I love this profession. I don't really trust too many clinicians. And I think it was actually a really healthy thing. I think that as long as that doesn't go too far where you can't trust anyone, I do think that we need actually more people challenging the status quo. And I've reached a level of acceptance with my personal injuries that was required for me to have sort of a nonconformist attitude, which if you follow me at all on social media, you're like, yeah, you're nonconformist. So, but that was like the baby roots of it back in PT school.
So now that you entered into PT school, after all of this, you're a little skeptical and all of that has just happened to you. Um, what was the transition like in terms of the academics, especially because some people don't know what a 3+3 is? Maybe we should backtrack a
Yeah.
little bit. Yeah. How was that academic transition in your 3+3 to the grad school portion of your program?
When I dedicate myself to something, I'm psychotically focused. So I basically didn't drink alcohol for most of my college career. I was like, I was an
Wow.
anomaly. I definitely drank more alcohol in my 30s than I did in my 20s. Um, so I don't know if that's good or bad or not, but the reality is that I was so incredibly focused that it wasn't that challenging for me, but I think because of my love of psychology, though, I had dedicated a lot of energy and time to trying to understand how my brain works, and in all different ways. So I'm somebody who really needs adventure and outdoors. I say needs, like my mental health depends on it now and back then. So I would, like in undergrad, I would stack my schedule. I'd have a super long day, and the next day I'd go golfing. So I was working really hard, but I always had sort of an inherent natural tendency to spend a lot of time outdoors. And I also uncovered like what study techniques worked for me. I was not a group study person. That was the worst thing you could do to me. Instead, it was note cards and a very specific style of studying those note cards, that really worked for me. So I would say it was stressful, but I felt like I always did have a handle on it.
Okay. And so for those people listening who don't know what a 3+3 is, and yours might have been set up a little differently, what was your
Yeah.
3+3 program like?
3 years of undergrad, and then the fourth year was technically my first year of PT school. So I didn't technically graduate from undergrad until after my first year of PT school. Then I went back to Kane just for the ceremony, and then I had graduated with my undergrad once those credits have applied. And then there were still 2 years left of PT school.
Yeah. And then 2 years later, you get your doctorate, even though you
Yep.
had already been in the PT program for that first year.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And then as you head into finishing PT school and new grad life, what did you think you were going to do as a PT?
It's a really good question. So this is where the roots, and this is very vulnerable. Actually, I don't think I've ever shared this part of it, because usually the
Oh,
questions are more around like what I'm doing now.
oh yeah, we'll get to it.
I no, I'm totally happy, because I believe that your audience is actually more served based off of that transition. My clinical rotations made me believe that magic hands were real. I
Oh,
believe that I knew how to mobilize someone's sacrum. I believe that I was able to mobilize someone's, thoracic spine in a way where it would create an alignment. And a lot of these narratives now that are no longer supported by research and are not necessarily the healthiest for practitioners. Now, I'm not saying to not use manual therapy ever. I understand that there's lots of different contexts that need to get applied through different cases. Somebody in chronic pain and super guarded, very low body awareness, traumatic experiences with their body or with healthcare providers, manual therapy could literally almost work miracles in the sense of the change it could create. But a lot of cases, more traditional cases, the typical person coming to PT does not really need that much manual therapy. And if they do, the context and the way in which we use it is so extraordinarily different than when I first graduated. I graduated in 2008. And for the first 4 years of my career, I would say almost everything I would say now is bullshit without knowing it. That it was upper cross, lower cross syndrome, but explained in this way that was just beyond the bell curve of truth. There is still, I believe, validity to that. If you have neck pain and you sit in this position for X period of time and that position is related to your neck pain, then I do believe that some of the fundamental values of working towards, like aspects of these theories that are now outdated still can reign true. You could still pull in thoracic, spine, mobility work, and strengthening someone's upper back, which arguably are part of upper cross. But the theory, when it's taken to its extreme, and during my early days, at least the clinics I was exposed to, really promoted the extreme. Leg length discrepancies, subluxations, and craniosacral therapy to, again, in a certain narrative, maybe there's a case for that, but not in the narratives I had. So honestly, I had thought that I was a manual therapist and that my skill set was in my hands.
And did you work in outpatient primarily then?
Yes. So I had 2 of my 4 rotations were outpatient, and one was neuro, and then the other one was acute. So obviously those that didn't apply, but I went into PT school knowing I was going to be outpatient.
Okay.
So I got those out of the way first, and then I finished with my 2, and I took a job at one of the locations that I did my internship that was extraordinarily manual therapy heavy.
Would you say your first job out of PT school was your dream job at the time?
Yes.
Okay. What made it your dream job back then?
I was given 1 hour, pretty much 45 minutes to 1 hour with every single client.
Like one on one?
However, I was told what to do during those 45 minutes to an hour. There was expectations around billing and around the narratives that were to be said around the plan of cares.
What would be an example? Like, so let's say you have an hour, 45 minutes to an hour with this one patient. What would be an example of maybe the limitations that you had within that hour or the expectations?
So I'll give the framework that tends to be throughout all of outpatient is this. If it's in this category of type of clinic, it is start off with your heat and stim, some form of manual therapy for 1, 2, or 3 units, ultrasound every single client, then 1, 2, or 3 units of Therex, depending on how many you did of manual therapy, usually trying to get to 4 skilled units, and then concluding again with another stim and ice on repeat forever.
On repeat for 4 years at the same place?
Yes.
And when did you leave it and why did you leave it?
I left once there's loads of reasons. And again, I do want to preface that I don't want this to become slander.
No, of course not.
But the general state of orthopedics is still relatively unchanged. Most people that I talk to are still going through something like this. So speaking to the general population, I started to evolve my thought process through self-education, not CEUs. Now there are good CEU courses out there. But back in 2012 to 15, which is like around when I started making my exit, they're really like the CEUs were just repeating dogma from PT school or repeating outdated dogma. So where I started to actually have my clinical existential crisis, which is what I call that phase, is through resources like what was formerly known as Level Up Initiative with Zach DeBoer, Quinn Hennock, who started clinical athlete. They since merged, now they're Kelu, clinical athlete level up. And when I started to meet those guys and they started to expose newer research that has not yet made it to PT schools, because it does take about a decade for newer research to get into curriculums or more. So we're talking about the curriculums are still not updated really. I think there's certain programs that are more in tune based off of what professors they bring in or adjuncts. But it was like reading these narratives like, what is this thing called? Nocebo. What is that? I only heard of placebo. And then go, holy shit, what? And then like you don't even know what to say during that first phase because you're just like, I don't know what's real. Like, and this is where the joking, and this what really bothers me, but in rehab right now, the running joke is like nothing matters, right? So it's like, because we're still in this really conflicted, like we could sublux your T3 to, like we super specific, like if we mobilize your left lateral anterior to posterior, like the reality is that that specificity is likely not going to be supported. But that doesn't mean that what we do doesn't do anything or that you can just do random stuff and have the same outcome. So it's a very confusing time for a clinician when they're in the middle of this limbo between the old way and let's say the new way, and finding how to merge those two worlds without throwing everything out from the old way. Like there are still certain things that we could pull from the old literature that holds true, but there's a lot that challenges pre-existing beliefs. And that was a really difficult time as a clinician.
What did you do after? So you had these 4 years at this outpatient clinic
Yeah.
and you left and you were having this kind of like crisis around what is PT? What am I even doing? Is any of this, was this even like valid or helpful for these people and kind of trying to move forward? Like, what did you do next to kind of overcome that, I guess? Because that's a lot. That's a lot to go through. You just
It
finished a
is.
ton of school. You
Yeah.
just worked for a long time and helped a lot of people, or so you thought. Like now what is, how do you overcome that?
And I was double board certified. So I'd earned
Oh,
my, this was before there were residencies. So I earned those through the old way, which is harder. And so I had my OCS and my SCS within 3 years of graduating. I think
mm.
no, 2 and 4 years after, because I did the first one at 2 year mark and I failed in year 3. And then I got it year 4 for the second one. So I had double board certified. And a lot of that stuff was really cool because it was more around like x-ray, like, imaging and rules around stuff. And it was really trying to be progressive to set our profession up for independence. So that I would say that actually did contribute to my freeing of like, oh, I'm not just a glorified massage therapist. There's a decision-making paradigm that is my skill set, but still where that decision-making paradigm landed was very confusing time. So to answer your question, I went into business myself because I realized that was the only way I was ever going to be in full control of the way I treated. I had always loved business. I had a fond, feeling about it. I always thought it was cool. I never had like these pre-existing beliefs around it that like you trade your life for it. There's a lot of people who believe things about business based off of like one or two people in their lives who may have destroyed their life because they didn't know how to run a business. But to me, it was always like this pathway to freedom. And I made the leap and I was like, we're never buying an ultrasound machine. We're going to have one stim unit because I believe that some people in high levels of pain and post-op, and there's certain uses for it, but that this clinic was going to be created revolving around what people truly need first. And then we will figure out how to monetize that, as opposed to saying, okay, here's my list of codes. What am I going to do? Which is how nearly every other clinic I'd ever come across is structured at the roots, even if their culture is really good. The culture could be strong and they could love their patients, but if the roots of the mechanics of the way they operate is insurance centric, billing centric, productivity centric, it's just an extension of the old system, just a little bit nicer skin on top of it.
Yeah. And so did you open up your own practice immediately? Like you were
Yes.
working for 4 years and then you're like, oh, time for my own practice. And you opened it like the next day, or what happened there?
Yeah. And it wasn't right at the 4 year mark. I would say that's when this existential crisis started.
Okay.
And then I launched my first business in 2015. So it was really about 6 years that happened. And in the last phase of my career at that employer, things were better because I had to open the clinic under their umbrella. So it wasn't mine. I didn't have ownership, but I was in more control. And there was at least some back and forth of like, I don't know if I believe in this anymore, but it did get to a break point where I had to just leave. I did launch a clinic within weeks of quitting. I also did take a in-school job where actually it wasn't in school. It's where you go to people's kids' homes and do evaluations. And the
Oh,
only
okay.
reason I took that was because it was the highest paying per hour job I could find. And I had 2 kids at the time. I was buried in debt. So there's a longer backstory, which I don't know if we have time for in this call, but the story is I made some, my dad had passed away when I was 27 and died in front of me. He had a heart attack in front of me, and I didn't have the coping skills that I wished I had or that I do have now. And I went down a bad path and I made a lot of mistakes. And as a result of those mistakes, I was $200,000 in debt. I had to sell my home. And that 200K was after having sold my home. And there was just layers and layers of despair. And that's actually what kept me in that previous job so long, is because like, how could I possibly quit when I'm buried under this much debt? But then it reached a breaking point, and I said, I could do this. I will figure it out. And I was a grown man at that age. I was 60. I was 30 years old, and I went and asked my mom permission. I was like, Mom, I want to quit. I'm going to launch a business. I have this idea of going direct to consumer, no MDs at all. It's going to be all about the patients. And I've got 2 gyms lined up that are interested in the idea where we're going to keep their people like in-house, not let them get to these shitty providers. I was like, but I have to let you know, I only have 2 months left of savings. And if I fail, I'm going to need to move my family here. So I can't do it on my own with knowing that repercussion could take onto you. And she was like, do you believe in it? I said, yes. She said, do you believe in yourself? I said, yes. She said, do it. So I had done 2 weeks worth of this torturous job of going to these kids' houses, not because the kids weren't awesome. It was that system is beyond broken. It was just this massive paperwork that didn't give a shit about the kids at all. Maybe it did get the kids what they needed sometimes, but long story short, I was like, this is not my purpose. This is not what I was on this earth to do. This is a way to make money. I quit that and just went to these 2 gyms, and it just took off from there, to be honest with you. It was, I'll fast forward the story and then we could go back and you could dig into the little points. But within 3 months, I had hired another physical therapist. Within 5 or 6 months, I had opened up more locations. By year 5, it was actually year 4, 4 years and 4 months later, we had 5 locations, 50 employees, and we did sell that for a multi-million-dollar exit. And that was in 2019, which was just coincidentally right before the pandemic, to which I then launched an online and a hybrid model, hybrid meaning combining in-person and digital elements, and just was very lucky to be ahead of the curve of what the world needed. And yeah, so that's, I'll pause there and we can go back to wherever you want to dig into next.
That was so much. I don't know where I want to start, but that was incredible. Like I got chills when you had talked about you asking your mom and, really that's a lot. That's a lot emotionally. And to be in that space and for her to say that, if you believe in it, go for it. And for you to go for it and be here right now is really, really inspiring.
Yeah, I thank her
So
every couple of months for that.
yeah, you really should
That's
like,
parenting, grade A parenting right there for an adult male. Yeah, to need to ask that, but I really did. I did need to ask her because it would have been wrong for me to take that risk, knowing it could have had those repercussions.
of
But
course.
what it hits on, and what I think a lot of students, new grads, they don't believe in themselves,
Hmm.
the most core level, because and related to a lot of this uncertainty. I'm a good doctorate, but I'm fraud, is what a lot of
Hmm.
people say. I'm an imposter because I don't even know what works or if I'm helping or if not. And how could I possibly go into business myself? Or how could I possibly quit this job? I just took it. And a lot of it is rooted in belief in self. And I think that the system has become predatory on this the system needs healthcare providers to remain vulnerable in order to exploit them. And when you have true belief in self, that means you can say, no, this job they lied to me. I don't care that it looks bad on my resume. When I interview next, they will see me for me, and I care about my patients. I'm dedicated to this profession. I will give this company my all. And you quit. You don't start lying to yourself and saying, this is just how it is, or everybody else deals with it, or what, I just got to get to 1 year this way. My resume is clear. Nobody gives a shit. I've hired, I don't know, what was it, 20 PTs and probably more than that with some degree of churn over the 4 years. Like, the reality is that I looked at their character, I looked at their personal skills, I looked at all these other things. And if somebody said to me, I left that job because it didn't align my values, I'd be like, this is somebody I want. What are your values? Tell me. And that actually elevates you. And then for those of you who can't find a place that aligns with your values, we are in a state of this profession where, yeah, it's unfair, but some of you are going to need to become entrepreneurs, even though you don't want to be. That's just the way it is right now. I do believe that we are in every market, if you look at all markets, they go through these consolidation phases where they basically combine, right? So think of like all the big players in healthcare. Like there's Health South that was like huge in the 90s. I don't know if you know that.
Yes.
And then they got broken up and destroyed basically for illegal stuff. When they got broken up, they were one of the largest PT providers in the United States. That's where a lot of the employers that spun off from. That's where I worked as a aide, is people who said, I'm done with Health South. I'm going to start my own little thing. Then what ended up happening is all these successful little things started getting bought up by venture capital money, which is where we're at now. So there's very few good quality, large, independent owners. Once you get successful enough, you sold to a venture capitalist. So that means there's investors behind it, which means fundamentally, in most cases, the client is no longer the patient, the client is the investors. So right now, what we're in is actually, we're at the peak and maybe on the other end of the bell curve of the consolidation phase, where now we have these massive mega players all around the United States. And what needs to happen is more one-offs start splicing away to restart the cycle again, and hopefully do the cycle entirely differently this time. But the reality is we need the next wave of employers to come up, because there's not enough spots. There are not enough spots for everybody. So employment is being an employer, being an entrepreneur is a skill like every other skill in the world that can be learned. It can be taught. It can be relayed. This thing called business has been going on since the beginning of human language. There are certain universal principles that you can learn, and you can do it, and you can have a great life while doing it. But a lot of that really hinges on that very first thing, which is belief in self.
Can we dive into the belief in self, but also the belief in self who maybe this is the student who wants to go into entrepreneurship or feels forced to go into entrepreneurship? Is this kind of what you're doing now online? Like, what are you doing in the online space?
Yeah. So what we do is we help people launch online and hybrid businesses. The cool thing about what we do is there's no copy and paste system. Most business coaching, which I don't identify as a business coach, I'll explain that in a minute, but most business coaching in our profession is just teaching a copy and paste, kind of like a McDonald's, style. Here's how you do it. Here's the system. Here's the routine. You go to a gym, you set up a table, you pay them some rent, you do a workshop, you sell a bunch of high ticket sessions. It's actually so simple. I don't know why anybody even needs to pay for it, but for some reason people do. You could probably Google everything you need to launch a cash business right now. You just sell your sessions for money. And but the reality is that I don't believe that serves the clinician long-term. I don't believe that leads to a fulfilling career. And I don't believe that's what actually serves the population. Very few people are willing to or able to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on rehab, nor do they truly need that much one-on-one time. Most of the world, now I'm not talking about immediate post-op, I'm not talking about somebody who got hit by a car last week. Most of the United States who need physical therapy never actually see a physical therapist. I don't know if you've seen those stats, but it's alarming how low the consumption rate is of physical therapy. Yet we have our professional organization saying overstock of physical therapists is coming. What the fuck are you talking about? We have an underutilization of physical therapists, not an overstock of physical therapists. But we are not actually getting to the people who are who are in need of us. And the people who are in need, the bulk of them, 80 to 90% of the population, it's either low level chronic, persistent, or lower level acute pain at the top of the medicalization cycle. What that means is slight low back pain. I'll just rest for a month. We know where this goes. They gain weight. They never fully make it back. It becomes cyclical. They get diabetes, hypertension. Now they're in the downward medicalization spiral. And a lot of that comes from very easy to resolve orthopedic issues if they had gotten the right care first. That person with a very mild knee pain or mild persistent low back pain, they also don't usually want to spend 3 hours a week inside of a clinic, especially when that time is viewed as, by most people, low value. I'm alone with a band doing something that I don't understand, where a kid comes over to me and says what to do next. Why would anybody do that for 3 times a week? So now you take this concept of the hybrid, which is, I think, where most people want to go and should go, which is where you blend in person with digital delivery mechanisms. This is not selling sessions here and selling programming here. This is instead coming up with like a unique process for a specific niche of a type of person, like either a psychographic profile, the way somebody identifies, like identify as a combat athlete or a new mom. It could be any type of thing that they identify, or a problem. So that could be specializing in shoulder rotator cuff specific issues, and you're the go-to for that for a whole bunch of different psychographics. Or you could be the incontinence expert for all sorts of different female type problems. Like, there's not only just post-birth that happens to, right? There's also menopausal types of issues and all these other things. So you could either go identity first or problem first. But when you go in now, you could say, what do they need? What do they really need? And you can start to come up with a framework for how you solve that person's problem that can be repeated over time. And you start to then get paid on the outcomes of a process you create, instead of just how many sessions you sell. And yes, you can include some sessions, but we're not hinging the value on, you're paying for my time. You're paying for this process I've created for this type of person with this problem. And now what this does is 2 things. It allows for demonetization. Demonetization is the progressive lowering of cost of a service or a good over the course of time. And it also allows for clinicians to have less time in the clinic, which allows for them to have just the normal time to take care of themselves, their relationships, their families, their health, which then allows them to pour into their caseload even further. It's this very complementary cycle. That is what I do, and that's what I believe is the future of healthcare.
And this is how your business was built, your clinic, I mean. Back when you left the outpatient clinic, you made kind of a hybrid model?
So initially, no.
Okay.
I'm very transparent about this, is that business is an iterative process. Even now, the way you launch your business will not be what it looks like in 1 year.
Right.
So the way we teach business is based off of Silicon Valley style, which is called minimum viable product. What that means is you launch with like just enough tangibility, and then you finish the actual, I shouldn't even say finish, you iterate that with the co-creative feedback from your people. So I'll give you a very specific example. In 2019, I launched a business called Counter-Strike. I thought it was going to be injury prevention and mobility for fighters, like literally fighters, like UFC fighters, kickboxers, jiu-jitsu. And I thought it was going to be mobility WOD for fighters. I got 5-10 fighters on there, and it was more focused on mobility and more focused on like injury prevention. And they were like, hey, Frank, man, I'm like, I feel like I don't have knockout power. I just always get overpowered. Can you help with that? I'm like, I mean, I am CSCS, so I know strength training. I was like, yeah, it's not what I specialize in, but you down if I make this program for you, you just stay really in touch with me. And what I'm going to do is start educating myself on best practices. And then like, let's have this feedback loop where we'll meet every couple of weeks, see how it's going. We'll make it better and better. Those 5-10 people, most of them loved it. Like, this is awesome. Can you keep doing this? Then somebody's like, hey, do you know anything about heart rate based conditioning? No, not at all. But let's get a heart monitor, and you cool if we do some experiments with you. People, and just fully transparent. Like, now there's certain things obviously in the realm of like some extreme orthopedic condition, like you're not going to test as much there, but the chances are most of you are called to serve a population that's not life or death, and that you can identify which clients really love this stuff of co-creation and just be transparent. Like, no, but I would love to use you as a base. I found this course. I'm going to take it right now, and then we're going to implement it. The next thing you know, I was like, man, this platform's awesome. Now the platform is heart rate-based conditioning, sport-specific strength training for combat athletes, plus injury prevention and mobility. And then now this thing just starts taking off. So we teach that same principle. Now, in retrospect, I didn't know this principle. This is like what I discovered through the building of my own business. I launched saying, I'm not dealing with MDs, and I am not dealing with like putting coding and billing first. That's like all I had in my mind. It's like, I'm going to do whatever they need. And that's that. Then slowly I started to be like, okay, man, nobody does any home exercise program. Like the notion of a home exercise program is the biggest joke there is. That no one freaking does it. No one does it. I don't care. They're all lying to you. There's like one crazy guy who does it. That's it. Everybody else is lying to you. So I was like, there's got to be a better way. Lo and behold, there's lots of technology that's readily available where you can pay $10 a month, $50 a month, $100 a month, depending on what you want, to plug into your skill set. And now all of a sudden I had like a behavior tracker where I'd be like, did you do your home exercise program? And when they'd come in for their session, let's say they were coming in once a week, I'd be like, hey, what the hell? I wouldn't just do that. I'd be like, hey, everything okay? Like personally, everything's good? Yeah, let's go. Family's good, work's good? Yeah. Now I have permission to coach hard. You just lost your out because they have no idea about what the hell, bro? What the hell? You didn't do anything. Do you want your back to get better? You sure? Why? Tell me why. I want you to say it out loud. Say it out loud. I want to hear it so I could run with my kids again. Okay. So what are we going to do differently this week to get you 2 of those sessions in, or whatever it is I'm having them do on their own? And that was when I started to realize, wow, the value is not just in the session. The value is what I'm doing between sessions, but I'm not technically getting paid for that yet. So if I do that in the current system where you either just take money for a session or insurance reimbursement for a session, then you're technically doing more work for less money. I was like, that's got to change. And that's when we started to come up with specialty programs, niche-based specialty programs inside that overarching business. So we have like running programs and women's health programs. And then that then started to evolve into my belief that each one of those programs could technically be their own standalone business, especially given the power and the tools of the internet.
And now you help so many people reiterate that process for themselves.
Yeah. 600, nearly 600. I think it's still in the 500s, but 500 plus clinicians through the program in the last 3 years. And it's a 12-week incubator style program. This is not a mastermind. There's no feel-good trips to the snowy mountains where we sing Kumbaya. This is a step-by-step process that teaches people how to launch a business. All of it is reverse engineered to each person's unique beliefs and goals. So there's no like, here's what you do, copy and paste thing. Instead, it's prompts and coaching moments to help uncover like, who's your ideal population. Sometimes you don't know. Sometimes you need help with that. Sometimes you experiment and you change it. Then which problems of theirs are we going to focus in on? What tools and methods of delivery can we use to solve those problems? Can it be fully digital? Can it be 90% digital, 10% in person? Can it be 50-50? Can it be 90% in person and 10% digital, depending on what you want, what we call your life design to look like. Life design is some of you want to travel. Some of you want to have kids. Some of you want to travel and have kids. Some of you want to live, different places in the world for 3-6 months at a time. Some of you just want to be by your parents to take care of them in an older phase of life. It doesn't matter, but you need to know that to reverse engineer the business decisions so that the mechanics of your business aligns with the desired lifestyle. And then when we cross-reference all of that, you leave with a model, and we then teach you how to market and sell that model using your authentic voice. No nocebo language to try to get patients, no scare tactics, and doing it in a way that really feels good and is fun and exciting to get your first few clients.
So what was that transition from? You went from treating clinically, even in your own business, to more coaching and helping other people do that?
Yeah. So in my first 9 months as a business owner in 2015, I had worked myself out of a primary treating role. So at the 9-month mark, I had hired another therapist who officially replaced me. And then I would basically, my job was training the other the therapists that I hired, managing the relationships with the gyms that I was inside of, creating the marketing and the sales processes for the business. So I started working on the business and less in the business, which is why I was able to build it enough to be able to sell it. Most PTs are just trapped inside their own business. And that means that you're your own boss. You're an employee to yourself in a way. And it might not make sense, but there's a difference when you're working on the business, you own the business, than just being the everything inside the business. And that's why I also started to realize that my ability to create programs and my ability to guide the direction of the business was my actual best skill set. But I've never left clinical life. So Counter-Strike continues to scale today. We have 100 plus athletes around the world in our program. Some of them are UFC fighters. Some of them are recreational moms and dads who just love kickboxing. But it's a scaled out program platform inside Counter-Strike into a couple different programs. We have a strength coach in Italy. We've got another coach here in Florida. We've got relationships with physical therapists and mental health providers. So I take a lot of pride in, I think, being one of the only business experts who you could literally watch still scale businesses. And my business partner and I have investments and strategic partners in clinical businesses as well. So we are inside the ecosystems of some of the names that you might know already, helping them grow their businesses to be that next wave of employers, because that is something that I really feel committed to.
I love that. And that's really cool. So what does a week in the life of you look like now?
So much time outside, you wouldn't believe it. So I wake up usually around 6:30 or so, not a hard time on that. And the first thing I do is read and do some mindset exercises. I do believe that positive self-talk and a lot of my roots from that psychology degree I talked about still stay. And I believe that my overarching philosophy is that tactics to the exponent of mindset equals outcomes. So it's like tactics to the little m equals outcomes. What that means is, especially watching 500 plus clinicians through the program, I don't misrepresent. There's a bell curve. Everybody else wants to make it sound like everybody just becomes a millionaire instantly. Like, no, that's not how it works. Some people struggle. We help them. We support them. They figure it out if they stay with it. A lot of people hit middle ground of success. They start making 3 to 5 grand a month, 5 to 10 grand a month, somewhere in that realm. And then the other side of the bell curve, they make 10, 20, 30, $40,000 a month, sometimes with no employees, with very little overhead. And what's fascinating about this, just from my bird's eye view of this bell curve, I'm like, they're all getting the same exact tactics. I'm not teaching, the Tommy who made $40,000 a month, and is consistently averaging between $20,000 and $35,000 a month. He didn't learn anything different than this person. And sometimes it'll be in the same exact niche. I'm like, and they don't have different followers on social media, same amount of followers. One didn't start with more money. And I was like, it's the mindset. It's the mindset that they're bringing to the tactics. Now, where this goes wrong, you might have seen this in some other coaches, is that they become just obsessed with mindset. And it's just like guru, like meditate it, attract it to you and it will come type stuff. But that's not, it's the tactics to the exponent of the mindset. So I start my day working on my mindset every single day. That is my goal. Then I move into taking care of my body. I get outside, I exercise, and then it's 3 to 4 hours of focused work, a lunch break, another 2 to 3 hours of focused work. And I try to be done by 4 or 5 most days of the week, sometimes sooner.
And are you working? Some people, obviously, the misconception around being a business owner is you just work all the time. So how many hours a week are you actually working then, like 40 or less?
30 to 35. Yeah. Now, I want to make sure you know that's learned through pain. So one of the reasons why we sold that original business is because I built it wrong. I built it with me still needing to drive to all those locations I had created. So I had 5 locations, 50 employees. There was not necessarily the mid-level management needed for that size company. There also wasn't a margin for it. It's like, that's a big company, but it's not big. Like that's big compared to small business, but it's not like, oh, I have a regional manager. So it was me and my business partner in the car all the time, going to these different locations, meeting with gym owners, meeting with those, so I was like, man, I'm not enjoying this anymore. And that's when we did the reset. And it was this amazing opportunity to say, what do I really want life to look like at this super granular level? And I had just certain, and it started with silly things like, I don't want to work on my kids' birthdays. That's not silly. I shouldn't say it. Small things though. Like that's a tiny detail in retrospect. Like it's a tiny, tiny detail. I was like, I just started writing it down. I was like, I don't want to work on my kids' birthdays ever. I don't want to have to drive to anything in this business on a regular basis. So all of a sudden I started lining up these constraints of what I don't want. Then I started looking at what I do want. And that's actually where the life design exercise was born, because I made it for myself. I was like, oh, I'm going back into business. I love business. And I saw phases of the growth of that first business where I had total freedom, weeks of vacation and tons of money that I would never have made as a staff PT. But I also then made some decisions at certain points that handcuffed me to the business even more. So now before I go into a venture, even right now, we're exploring a partnership with this company that I think is going to be huge. And I'm potentially taking over a small minority ownership. The number one thing I'm looking at is not how much money I'm going to make from it potentially. The number one I'm making sure is that I'm not spending more time in it than I want to, and that it doesn't come with more obligations than I want in the longer term. So once I really designed my life design, I realized, okay, I am only going to have digital and mostly digital hybrid locations. So for the year and a half before COVID, I was doing eval only hybrid. This is where you go to a location, do a bunch of evals, and then all of their follow-up care is digital. And I would sell that in, let's say, 90-day plan of care for most people. Sometimes it'd be 6 months, sometimes it'd be 2 months. But the reality is that most people do need follow-up. They don't need your hands. They don't need your direct time. They need asynchronous care or pre-filmed education, habit tracking, programming in some capacity to do either the correctives or the rehab, whatever words you use for the things you do. And I just kept cross-referencing every single decision. Does this impact my life design? Yes or no? And one of the things is anybody who gets attracted to the field of psychology means they're a little fucked up, right? That's why you go into that field, is you're like, I don't think I'm right, so I'm going to do this to try to figure myself out under the guise of me learning about how to help other people. And then in the process, you do learn how to help other people, but only if you've learned to help yourself. And I realized that for me, I need to be outside a lot. I need to exercise a lot. I need to spend time reading. And I burn out very quickly, which is why I'm so passionate about burnout. I could burn out by Wednesday. I could have a great weekend, work my ass off Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and be fried, have nothing left for my kids. My daughter's 10. She's not going to be around, in the house much longer, 6, 7 years if she goes away to college. And I'm not giving her the leftovers of my energy anymore. So I've reverse engineered the way to run my business so that I have all these energy fulfilling things in the morning and a relaxed pace. Even though I'm intense with my goals and what I do intensely, but it's more of a relaxed pace. And then I have a disconnect period of time so I could get out of work mode. So when I show up for my family, they're not getting the pretend present Frank that's really cycling through all the things about work and what to do next and feeling behind and stuck and all these other things. And that does still happen occasionally. I'm not superhuman. There are times where I'm in the business and I can't stop thinking about it. That's true. But more often than not, though, I am able to follow these routines and force the business to succeed under the constraints of what I want my life to look like.
And it was interesting scheduling with you too, because you made that a point when we were scheduling this episode.
I forgot about that.
You made it a point, and I was like, wow, that's really cool. Because for me, I'm working full time, so normally I do interviews on Sundays, and you were like, nah, I don't work on the weekends. And I was like, good for him, because I love the life design concept as well. And I did this in probably grad school and undergrad too. I think it's so important. So I think that's really cool that you brought that up. Students in PT school don't make time to do that very often.
It's true. And there's lots of really good, valid excuses not to, that you can no longer lean on as a crutch, because it could be 10 minutes of movement. It could be 5 pages. It could be saying, no, at lunch, I go for a walk. I'm going to grab a smoothie. I'm going to drink it while I walk. You may have to get creative about how to implement it during different phases of life. So I have 3 kids. I'm not going to lie that during our my youngest is 3, that was a crazy time. But I knew that in order for me to be there for him and be there for, like, yeah, I had to wake up a little bit earlier to be able to then go do my things. But the actually, I would love to hook you guys up with a training that's from inside the curriculum. This is not something we give away. It's called Own Your Week. And it's basically a time management strategy system of how to use Google Calendar in like what order to block things off with. And most people are like, oh, so expecting me to tell them like block off your revenue generating activities first, like, or P2. It's always mental health and physical health first.
Mhm.
So I think it would really serve your audience. And there's no opt-in. I'll just give you the link. It's a direct link from our training, and it'll give you a really good tactical way to approach schedule management, and also the way to approach balancing your career, where you no longer need to believe what I think is an overcorrection from grind theory. So in the 2015 to 2020, the grinded out theory of business was the prevalent mode of operating. And then 2020, we all burnt out, we all got fried. And then it switched where it's like, don't grind. And almost like if you have ambition, you're made to feel bad, or you feel bad for making other people feel bad that you have a goal or something like that. And the overcorrection to the grind theory is that it's hard to describe, but I just know that this training is the antidote to it, because it's talking about how to balance your career goals in a way where they are no longer at odds with your personal goals in your personal life, but instead the constraints from each actually power each other. Instead of saying, no, I don't subscribe to grind theory, so that means I am going to stay in this job as an employee because I'm not going to grind. I'm like, well, you don't have to. Don't have to. You shouldn't have to. Now, that might mean, though, that you have to become a master at schedule management, though. So there's these traits, and that's a skill. How do you start with all skills? You suck at them. Most people, they give up on time management very quickly because they don't actually have, one, a framework to follow, or two, a feedback loop with themselves to actually iterate and improve it. They just give up. So I think that could really serve your audience.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. I'll put it in the link in the description of the podcast, and
Cool.
when it's up on Facebook too, you guys can check it out. It sounds like something I wish I would have had in the beginning of PT school. It would have saved a lot of mental well-being, especially with long study hours and such. So thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem. And for everybody who's going to actually watch it, you will need to contextualize, because I talk about business, replace that with school, right? So there's
Yeah.
the theory, listen for the theories and the principles, and don't throw the baby out with the bathwater because I say X, Y, Z. And yeah, there's going to be certain things in your schedule that you're not under control of. What we're talking about is all the rest of the space. So there's a great book called 176 hours. Is that right? 184. I'm so bad with math, I have no idea. It's however many hours there are in the week. And when you really look at how many hours there are in a week, you're like, holy shit, I have no excuse. Like, there's,
Mm-hmm.
even with PT school, even with all these obligations, until you are mastering your calendar, you are leaving it up to chance where you go in life and your career.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I know it can feel like PT school is an excuse. But honestly, like you said, it's not. You got a lot of hours in the week, guys. So go ahead and listen, watch it.
And it will be replaced by something else. So I've literally watched people for years go from PT school as the main excuse to saving up for a house, a wedding, a baby,
Mm-hmm.
and now they're in their mid-30s and they're literally handcuffed to a job that they can't leave. So the time to take risks is younger in your career, and calculated. It doesn't mean you have to be reckless, but the time to take the greatest calculated risk you could afford to take is in the younger years, before you start getting the golden handcuffs on, which is where you start. That expression means, like, let's say you buy a house that requires a $4,000 monthly budget for just household stuff on top of the other things, on top of travel. That means you need to take home, let's say, 8K into your bank account between you and your partner. Much different position to launch, not impossible because I did it, but much different position than launching when you're like, Well, if I make $1,000, I cover my expenses. Like, it's just a much, it's a much healthier place to launch a business.
It is. It is. For all the students who are listening and have had so many takeaways already, but if you had to give yourself one piece of advice, maybe not yourself, let's give a current PT student actually, a
Yeah.
current PT student, one piece of advice that you haven't said yet, what would you tell them?
Freedom first, clinical freedom, time-based freedom, financial freedom. If you really put those things past all decisions through those things, do I have clinical freedom in this job? Yes or no? No, move on. There's literally hundreds and hundreds of options for you. Most people don't actually explore enough. They just go to like 5 or 10 and think that that's it. So, but put freedom first. And when you get older, and I know we're in the last minutes here, but I've had a lot of exposure to death. There's been multiple people in my family who've had cancer. Somebody very tight with me is got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer for the 4th time. She had stage 3, then stage 4 3 times in her 40s. And I'm only 37. I know I look a lot older because of my white beard. But because of those near-death experiences from people near me, I'm grateful because I get to look back now in a different way. I look at life very differently. And a lot of people don't get those close to home near-death experiences until it happens to them much later in life. Freedom in every way will be what you wish you had had when those final moments come. So prioritize them now.
Thank you for sharing that. That was great. For students who want to reach out to you and don't know where should they reach out to you?
I'll give you 2 ways. You could follow me on Instagram, which is where I'm personally active. If you DM me there, it's actually me. It's Frank_Benedetto. And then if you want to take advantage of this huge library of free trainings, we have a free Facebook group that I have over the past 2.5 years, probably 30 or 40 free trainings in there on a whole bunch of different topics. I go pretty deep because my philosophy is to wow you with the free stuff so that you just naturally one day wonder what it's like to work with us for real. So the free stuff is really good, really moves the needle, and we pour a lot into it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Frank. It was a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Have a good rest of the day.
You too. Bye.